Hi, scholars. Happy Monday. We're going to be looking at your ELA lesson for April 27th. It's going to be Unit 8, Chapter 4, The Changing Landscape of California. Before we get started, let's look at our week in review, talk about our grower team value, how you can become team captain this week, and then look at our objective and look at our big question for the day. Looking at our week in review and what we're going to be working on in language arts, today we're going to be doing our guided notes for Chapter 4. Tomorrow, you're going to be independently working on some close reading questions about the chapter. There's 2 short answers tomorrow. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the video, but there's not going to be a video to go over them tomorrow. I'll review the questions towards the end of this. Wednesday, we're going to have chapter 5. I'm going to read that together with you on the video, and we have some word work to go over some vocab. Thursday on Edulastic, I'm going to put up an article that's a little bit of enrichment work. It's an article about the Native Americans, and then there's going to be some questions to follow it up. And then Friday, we're going to do a Chapter 7 guided notes with video, just like today. Our grower team value for this week is achievement. How can we show achievement, though, while working from home? So remember, we are all preparing you guys for 6th grade next year, and you're so close to that. So you could be prepared for 6th grade by showing high achievement in things like submitting all of your work right now. That means texting answers when I ask for it, emailing answers, completing your iReady and Edulastic. Remember, for iReady, we're looking for 45 minutes in each class a week. So 45 minutes of language arts and 45 minutes of math. And then Edulastic, you'll only have Edulastic assignments. A teacher will announce it in their videos, so I wouldn't expect one on there every day. When I post one on Thursday, I'll put a video up to let you know. And then lastly, that's asking questions. So if you're a little bit confused, or even if you have something tangentially related, text or call, ask a question, share that work, and going above and beyond. That's scholars like who would record videos for our Shakespeare unit and send them to me, or just finding extra ways to participate in the material. Remember, we're still going to be selecting team captains. So Miss Corkins, Miss Yosef, and I are looking for scholars. Looking at our big question for this chapter. So this chapter we're looking to answer, what impact did the arrival of explorers, miners, missionaries, and settlers, and what is now California, have on Native American way of life? So how did these 4 groups impact them? And what was their motive for coming in the first place? So why would they come to California? And then what did they do there that impacted or had an effect on the Native Americans who already lived there? Next up are laying the landscape, our objective. I can use text evidence to create clear, detailed notes about Native American lives. So these aren't just notes like miners came to California for gold. Why did miners came to California for gold? Let's add a detail to that. And this impacted the Native Americans by. So we want to have as many details as possible, but it has to be clear. We don't want to have like 3 groups of people in one note. Looking at our vocabulary, we have 4 new words in this chapter. Loincloth, a piece of cloth worn around the hips as clothing by men in certain cultures, usually in warm climates. Think of something that's kind of like a linen sheet. It's a small piece of cloth just around the hips. It's usually just to cover up like private parts to keep their dignity. Quiver is a bag or case used to carry arrows. It kind of looks like a tube, and it's strapped to their back, kind of with like a backpack. That way they can have arrows they can just pull and notch onto their bows. Nimble is an adjective. It means able to move quickly and gracefully. Think of even when you say the word nimble, nimble. It even sounds quickly. Think of a character like Spider-Man or a gymnast. These are people that are like, they can do a lot of flips very quickly. They're agile. They're able to get from one place to another with style. And immunity. Immunity, it's a noun. It's the body's ability to resist or fight off a disease. So by doing things like having a good diet, exercise, taking vitamins or medicine, you can raise a body's immunity so it's strong and can fight off diseases on the inside. Our word work is below. I want you to try and match our new vocabulary words to these 3 sentences. So we have 4 new words, but you're only going to be using 3 of them. Number 1, he drew the arrows from his blank to make the perfect shot. Number 2, her blank fingers sewed the dress with ease. And number 3, being a teacher builds up one's blank because there are often illnesses among the staff and students. We're going to start on page 31 of our reader now. It's in the video description below. It looks like this. Take a moment to pause if you have to and get there. We're going to be reading this and taking notes over explorers, who are kind of like pioneers, and miners. So we're looking for each of these groups' motive. Why did they come to California? And then what impact on the way of life of Native Americans did they have? Starting at the top of 31. At the eastern edge of California's Central Valley, where the grassland meets the jagged Sierra Nevada mountains, there's a city named Oroville. In Spanish, oro is the word for gold. This city was once a small town. The town earned its name during the California Gold Rush, where thousands of gold prospectors flocked to the valleys in search of quick riches. A prospector is like a miner. Oroville was just one of many lawless, rowdy towns that sprang up all over Northern California during this time. So these weren't nice or fancy towns. These are just like shacks of buildings. People built these towns as quick as possible, so they just had somewhere to live and eat, so they could be out there mining every day and try and get a quick buck and make this money. Many people who joined the California Gold Rush never did find much gold, so it was like gambling. However, they did find other forms of wealth. Oroville was at the head of the Feather River, just beneath the Sierra Nevada mountains. Supplies for the gold miners were shipped up that river from Sacramento. People who lived in Oroville did not need to look for gold, because they grew rich selling shovels and foods to the miners in the hills. So these people, these explorers who came out here and they weren't mining, they would sell they would sell food and shovels, these supplies to the miners. So some people would be living in the town, keeping it all running stores, taverns, inns, these shops to sell to these miners who were going up in the mountains to get this gold and metals. Last paragraph. When the gold rush ended, pioneers moved in and carved up the land into farms. Thanks to warm, sunny weather, wet winters, and rich soil, the Central Valley was perfect for farming. A few years later, the Transcontinental Railroad was finished, linking California to the rest of the United States. The railroad passed right through downtown Oroville, making it possible for Central Valley farmers to send their goods to markets all over the country. Take a moment, just make a prediction. What was the motive? What reason did the explorers and miners have for coming to California? And then think, how did they impact the life of Native Americans? Make a prediction. So, the explorers, their motive was land for farming. They came out here to try and find land for farming, this land like near the Sierra Nevada River. And they were also looking for things like mines or hills that would be rich in gold. They weren't actually mining for it, but they were looking for these resources. So their motive was land for farming. The impact they had on Native Americans. They started the gold rush that would put them all at risk. The rest of this chapter, we're going to hear about how this gold rush and all these new people would negatively impact the Native Americans. They didn't really bring anything good to them. And then miners, their motive obviously was they sought gold and precious metal in the hills. Sought means to seek or find. They were trying to make a quick buck and get rich quick by going to California and getting this gold rush. But they impacted life because they disrupted native economy with a railroad. So they talked about the Transcontinental Railroad in our chapter. Trans is a prefix that means to go between. Think of transfer. If I transfer money from my bank account to yours, I'm giving you some of mine to yours. If it's a transcontinental, continent is like a landmass. We know what a continent is. It's like North America, South America, Africa. It's going from one part of a continent to another. Transcontinental, from the east of North America to the west of North America. On page 32, it starts with Ishi, Lone Survivor. I'm only going to read page 32, but then I want you to take a moment. I want you to read till page 39. The following 6 pages talk about the differences between the Native Americans and the settlers at the time, especially in terms of their lifestyle. So you're going to learn a lot about Native American diets, how they traded. But I would like to read the first part to you, talking about Ishi and giving context to these these tribes of Native Americans. The top of page 32. It was in downtown Oroville in the summer of 1911, many years after the gold rush of 1840s and 1850s. There is a middle-aged man named Ishi. The last of his people emerged from the wilderness. It was a hot, dry summer, just like every summer in the valley. A few nights before, a thunderstorm had rolled through, and a bolt of lightning had started a wildfire in the dry, grassy foothills across the river. Oroville was safe from the flames, but the winds blew smoke through the town for many days. Ishi must have looked like a ghost to anyone who saw him sneaking down the smoke-filled streets. He wore only a tattered loincloth made of rabbit hide, and he carried a bow and small quiver of arrows. Ishi was starving, alone, and scared. There was a time when settlers lived alongside Native Americans in California's Central Valley. Indeed, there was a time when Native Americans were the only people living in what is now California. But in 1911, Ishi was a very unusual sight. He was certainly not the last Native American in California, but he was probably the last to leave the woods and the old way of living. He was certainly the last of his tribe, the Yahi people. Why do we still remember a lonely, hungry man named Ishi who is now searching for food on that smoky, hot summer day? What had happened to the rest of his people and all the other native tribes of California? Unfortunately, the story of what happened to the Native American population of California presents a sad and dark chapter in Native American history. The Native Americans of California were pushed aside to make ways for gold mines, railroads, farms, towns, and cities. So before you read page 33 to 39, I want to take a moment just to talk about that last part. So this is a very dark moment of American history. Think of something like a world war, but this is a moment when you look at our ancestors and the people at the time, and they sound like villains and they sound like monsters in some cases. They took advantage and exploited people for their own greed. A lot of the time, it wasn't out of necessity, like we needed this more than them. It was because people wanted it and they didn't need it. We could have worked alongside a lot of these people, but a lot of people at the time were greedy and took advantage of it, and it ended up killing thousands of these tribes in California. So, before that, when you read this, you're probably going to feel pretty sad, and that's normal. But I don't want you personally to feel this guilt or this weight upon your shoulders, because while this is very terrible, you are not personally responsible for it. And the best thing we can do to honor these Native American tribes that were decimated is to respect their history and respect their culture and not exploit it like some other people do. So this is still something to this day that a lot of people hold in contention. There's some language and just words that people use now that are offensive and still belittle the Native Americans. So, for example, I want you to think about the Washington Redskins, which is a famous football team. There's still a debate about their name because that is a derogatory term for Native Americans, but it was made normal because of that team and when they were in the NFL. So I'm not saying one way or the other whether that you should feel ashamed about this or if it's right or wrong. I just want you to think about treating this content with respect and not making jokes about it or thinking less of these people because they were a very respectful people that were mistreated and exploited by people thousands of years ago so that we could be where we are now. Picking back up on page 40, we're starting at the very top of the page. There's no header. We're going to be looking at missionaries and settlers on this page. A missionary is a person who would go to a different culture or civilization or land to spread their religious beliefs. And a settler is someone who would try and create a town or a city. These are people who would settle down and try and create something out of nothing. We're going to be similarly looking for their motive. Why would they be coming to California? And then the impact they had on the way of life of Native Americans. Starting at the top of 40. Spanish settlers colonized California beginning in the mid 1700s, and things changed rather quickly for the Native Americans. So Spanish settlers were also coming here, not just North Europeans coming from the east. So think back to our early American civilization. We had those Spanish settlers, people from Spain, who were trying to, trade with the Maya and Aztec, but a lot of the times exploiting them. Instead of trying to push the California tribes out of the way, the Spanish sent missionaries to persuade the people to change their way of life. Missionaries were determined to convert the native people to Christianity, to educate them, and in their mind, civilize them, and to teach them to become farmers. Look at the word civilize and why that's in quotation marks. Think about when we talk about quotation marks in class, it usually doesn't mean that they're serious. Civilize someone is to teach them how to act proper or respectful, how to use, utensils while you eat, how to dress nice. I don't think these missionaries um, were going out there really to spread their religious belief. Voluntarily. They didn't give them a choice, really, of like, oh, hey, if you don't want to join our religion, you don't have to. We can leave. They came out here to change these people because the Spanish missionaries said, your way of life is wrong. We're going to teach you. You are acting like savages, like animals. A typical mission included a church and new house for Native Americans, plus thousands of acres of farmland. So this sounds pretty nice at first. So they're going to come here, they're going to build some new land, they're going to build some houses for you, and you're going to have a bunch of land to have farms on. However, while the missionaries offered peace, they had brought soldiers with them. They gave the tribe a choice: live at the mission, which is the compound where their missionaries lived, or fight against these soldiers. Doesn't really sound like a choice. It either sounds like you either join us and convert to our religion, or you fight these soldiers and most likely die. Think about the difference in weaponry and equipment. The soldiers would have things like metal and iron armor and guns. The Native Americans would at most have leather and then bows and arrows and spears. It wouldn't really be a fair fight. Once they moved to the mission, Native Americans had to dress like Europeans, and they had to stop practicing their own beliefs and customs. Mostly, however, they worked the farmland, essentially a kind of forced labor, so they didn't even have a choice in the matter. When you were here, you had to dress and act like us, and we're going to force you to work on our farm every day. Kind of sounds like indentured servitude or slavery. Not surprisingly, many tribes didn't want to give up their homelands. Who could blame them? At first, the Spanish could not force people to move. However, without even realizing it, European settlers and explorers brought a deadly weapon to the Americas: disease. Smallpox and other illnesses devastated Native American populations in Southern California. The people had no immunity to these diseases. Within a few years, some tribes were almost totally wiped out. The survivors had little choice but to live at the missions. So, the Native Americans didn't have immunity, or their bodies weren't used to these foreign diseases. So, when these foreign people came and brought these new diseases, they got really sick from it, and it killed and wiped out most of these tribes. Eventually, the Native American groups of Northern California suffered a similar fate. First came the explorers, followed by miners and the settlers. These new rivals were all hungry for the land and its resources. They came by the thousands to mine and to build farms and railroads and cities. They had guns, plus help from the U.S. Army, and they were determined to own every inch of valuable land in California. Tribes were forced to move on the small reservation lands. Those who refused were often massacred. Remember Ishi, the wild man who emerged from the wilderness in Oroville? Well, when he was just a boy, his people, the Yahi, refused to move off their land. Gold miners attacked Ishi's village and killed most of his family and friends. He and a handful of others managed to survive in the wild. Years passed, and one by one, all the other Yahi died. At last, only Ishi remained in the woods and canyons where his ancestors had once lived. Hungry and tired, Ishi finally came in from the wilderness. Ishi did find a place in modern society. He devoted most of his life to teaching anthropologists about the Yahi language, mythology, and customs. An anthropologist is a scientist or a researcher who studies a society. So they study how people live their life and how these cities work. The Yahi tribe is gone now, but in some ways the culture lives on, and Ishi's knowledge remains for everyone to learn. So that is a lot to unpack right there. First, let's look at our notes. Why did these missionaries come to California? And then how did they impact the tribes? And then settlers, why did they come to California? And then how did they impact the tribes? Our guided notes. Missionaries, their motive was to civilize Native Americans. Remember, we're using civilize ironically, hence the quotation marks. They came here to try and change Native Americans. It wasn't a choice they gave the Native Americans. They were forcing them to become like them. And then the impact they had on their life, they used soldiers to force tribes to convert and perform forced labor. So you had to come with us. You didn't have a choice. You have to do what we say. Settlers, Their motive for coming to California was to find new land and resources like the explorers, but they brought deadly diseases with them that impacted the Native Americans, like smallpox, that wiped out tribes. There's plenty of other impacts, but that was one of the biggest ones that had the biggest death toll. Wrapping up for today and also showing you what to do for tomorrow. Make sure you continue to check Edulastic for new assignments as we announce them in our videos. So I wouldn't put something randomly up on Edulastic like in a quiz or a test without telling you in a video. So for example, I have one on Thursday in language arts, but I'm also going to put up a video announcing it that day. Also, make sure you're watching Miss Corkins and Miss Yosef's videos and checking packets so you know when to sign on and check for them. Complete 45 minutes of iReady reading and 45 minutes of iReady math a week. So that's an hour and a half total, just 45 minutes on each part. Make sure you log 30 minutes daily in your reading log. And then also prepare to pick up our last packet of the year this Tuesday and Thursday at the school. So you'll be able to come in this Tuesday or this Thursday from 10:30 to 12:30. If you're not able to come in Tuesday or Thursday, I think we're also going to do it on Saturday. But we'll also be calling for advisory calls today, this Monday, to let parents know. If you have an IEP and you have a different packet, then you're going to have to be coming in on Thursday. IEP packets are only going to be passed out on Thursday, but all other general packets will be there on Tuesday. Remember, reach out if you need help and you need to pick these up. It's our last ones for the year. It's kind of mind-blowing. And lastly, tomorrow, you're going to be using Chapter 4 to complete short answer questions, and you're going to text those completed responses to me. I'm going to go over them in a moment. I'm not going to put up a video for them tomorrow. I'll read and review the questions in 1 second, but it's the next day in your packet. So tomorrow, you're going to open your reader back up, and you're going to work on answering these 2 short answer questions. So tomorrow in your packet for 428, you're due now. You're going to match some vocabulary first. You're going to use your reader. You have some vocabulary. Here are your 2 questions that you're going to text the answers to. Number 1, what is meant by the following sentence on page 32? So on page 32 of our reader, we have this sentence. He was certainly not the last Native American in California, but he was probably the last to leave the woods and the old way of living. What do you think they mean in that sentence? He was not the last Native American, but he was the last to leave the old way of living. Granted, you have like 3 or 4 lines, so make sure you restate an answer and you explain your reasoning for what you think it means. Number 2 gives you a quote. Missionaries were determined to convert the native people to Christianity, to educate them, and in their minds, civilize them, and teach them to become farmers. Evaluate. Why might the word civilize be in quotation marks in the first paragraph that you just read? Why do you think the word civilize is in quotation marks in that quote? You're going to restate an answer below as well. After that, you just have your handwriting for the day. But if you have any questions, make sure to text or call. I will have a reading video to go with our new chapter for Wednesday, and then we have our Edulastic on Thursday. Make sure you're coming in on Tuesday or Thursday to pick up your new packets, though. Thank you, scholars, and have a great day.